All right, hi everybody on Facebook live streaming this talk, 5 Steps to Healing Earth, How to Restore Earth Systems. I have an audience here of beautiful folks here in Wayne, New Jersey at the Wyckoff Body and Brain Yoga Center. They asked me to come and do this presentation on Earth Day in celebration of Earth Day. And I'm going to mostly be speaking to the audience here, but feel free to make comments and questions, and I'll be responding to those later today. And so I'd like to begin again by saying I've been really inspired by the way that GLTV has presented the work of body and brain yoga, and how he looks to nature for inspiration. He looks to the garden for principles of how we can restore our own inner energy systems. And he's studied a lot of the ancient Korean text, as all of you know, and one of the things that's really fascinated me in my life and my journey is the ancient teachings of various cultures and traditions and how they learned to live in balance and in right relationship with the earth. As one of my elders told me, it was the role of the elders in a community to remind everyone to make decisions that benefited the earth, because if they didn't do that, then their future generations wouldn't have what they needed to survive. And so our culture has been sort of broken in ways where our elders are no longer in a very influential decision-making role. We've oftentimes just kind of displaced them into retirement homes or communities, and then our younger generations are put into educational systems that are all grouped with their same ages, which is very unnatural when you look at the patterns of human evolutionary history. So I'm very inspired, continue to love learning from body and brain yoga and what it has to offer with healing our inner flows and our inner systems, connecting in with our soul's purpose and our heaven's gift, our spirit guidance. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about that, but mostly my intention today is to really share practical information about how, as a gardener and as guardians of the earth, how we can be stewards in the day-to-day the way that we live, and how we can understand our connection to the greater cycles of earth systems so that we can be contributing to the restoration and healing of them, which ultimately benefit us and humanity. It's really the only option if humanity is going to be surviving for a long term, is for us to do this work together. So I think it would be appropriate for me to start just by telling you a little bit more about my context and where I'm coming from, the context of my design and my perspective. So as Anne said, I'm a certified master gardener. I went to school for environmental horticulture science, which is basically garden cultivation, and with an emphasis on how to do that ecologically and protecting the environment. One of the things that has been a big part of my teaching and training is permaculture, which is it stands for permanent agriculture. That's what it initially was started as, but then it quickly evolved as permanent culture. So permaculture is an integrative design science for creating sustainable human settlement, working with nature and in collaboration with nature rather than against nature. So permaculture was something that was introduced to me both through environmental horticulture, but also through other natural building and sustainability activities that I was involved in. So how did I get interested in sustainability? Was it always a part of my passion? No, not really. When I was young, I spent a lot of time in nature. I grew up in a beekeeping family, so I had a lot of time connecting with bees and nature. And I appreciated it to a degree, but when I was an adolescent, I thought the world was going to be ending in the year 2000. I thought the world would end before I even got out of high school. And that's kind of a depressing thing to think when you're young. So it was very hard for me to feel positive about the future and have an optimistic vision. And so I was very self-destructive. I was in extreme sports. I did a lot of drugs, a lot of drinking. I was very careless. I didn't think that the future really mattered. I didn't think I'd ever go to college. And I abused my body, my temple. I heard it a lot with snowboarding and BMX bikes. By the time I was 17 years old, I had had 5 near-death experiences, all where I experienced like I could be passing over right now, and then I came back. And I always felt guided, I always felt protected, like some sort of angelic force was keeping me alive. And so I had this experience when I was 17 where all of that suffering and trauma came to kind of a rock bottom point. It was all piling up on top of itself. And I won't share the whole story, but what I realized is that I had to pick a path of choosing wisely and forgiving and loving myself, or I was going to completely self-destruct. And I feel like that's kind of where we're at on a species level, is we have to choose a path of forgiving each other and loving each other, and taking care of our own self and our community and the earth, or we might not make it too much longer. But that experience really propelled me into a path of seeking truth and understanding and how to live in right relationship with myself. Initially, I was so out of integrity and out of balance with myself, I had to find a way of living with less suffering. So that was where the path started. And that led me to gardening. I felt like gardening was something that would be a practical, useful, helpful tool. Wherever I could go in the world, people need food, and they need plants. They need to grow things for food, shelter, fiber, medicine. So I thought, this is a really great thing to study. So I started doing that, and that got me into other sustainability activities. I was actually living in a building that had mold, and I got really sick, and I was like, what are we doing? Why are we building buildings that create mold? And that inspired me to look into ecological building design. How do we create green buildings that aren't going to poison us when we're living in them? And then that led me down a path of natural building and earth building, and learning how have indigenous cultures around the world built structures for thousands of years that are life-giving, life-regenerating. They help us stay healthy. They don't pollute and contaminate our bodies. So this was my path, and I as a sustainability activist, I started a student organization when I was in Santa Barbara, and I quickly realized that personal sustainability and my inner sustainability was a very important part of the conversation, and as being a leader for sustainability. And so that's why I spoke to this earlier, why I feel like Ilchi Lee's vision of inner change and changing the self first and then bringing that change out into the world is so important. It really is the apex at the center of where change happens. Any person who's listening to this can resonate with the fact that change starts with them, or with each one of us. It's not different for any human. We all have the ability to change our own life, our own health, and then our family life, our community life, and our environment. And so basically, I've spent the last 15 years really dedicated to how do we find practical solutions to create a sustainable world, to create heaven on earth, to co-create a bright future for ourselves and future generations. And I've mentioned some of the fields that I've worked in, and I won't talk too much more about my background, but basically after that 15 years of really studying these topics, I've began to realize that there's patterns. There's a pattern language of what creates health and what degenerates or destroys health in any system that you're talking about. And so whole systems design is all about how do you look at the whole, the sum of the whole of all the parts that work together to create health in a system. Whether we're talking about an ecological system and the minerals and the air and the fire of the sun, the water, or if we're talking about a human system. Whole systems design is putting all those parts together, understanding how they work to the best of our abilities, and designing for optimization, designing for synergy, designing for regenerative, life-supporting performance. So that's what I'm passionate about. I love looking at natural systems, human systems, economic systems, and inner landscape systems, and how we create health. So I'm going to write a couple things up here on the board. So there's this pattern that I've realized that happens in nature. When we throw a rock into a pond, what pattern does it make? Concentric circles, yeah, a rippling effect out into the world. And this is a pattern that is is happening all over the place, from cells, where in molecules there's in cells there's molecules, and then in molecules there's the spinning of atoms and electrons, and then if you go out into the universe, there's galaxies and planets, and it's actually a multiverse of multiple universes all spinning these circles that are just concentric rings that fractal in every direction that we look. No matter how minute we can look and no matter how big, there's just bigger and bigger circles. And so now the known universe is called our cosmic view, or the orb of our cosmic view. It's what we can see. It's this huge, massive circle. But ultimately, on planet Earth, we have the Earth, the ecology. It's the biggest circle. It's the whole of our planet, of our spaceship that's floating through space. And then we have our society. And then we have our economy. And we have our individual self. So this is a sustainability model that I created after studying sustainability for a long time, and it's a little bit different than what some other people talk about. And I won't go into how I came to that conclusion. There's all this whole story to it that I'm writing about in a book. But basically, when I look at sustainability of our planet, this is what I think illustrates what we need to do the best and what the reality is of the situation. We have this ecological system that supports all life. It is the absolute value, or the fundamental, essential value that provides all of the materials for society and community and culture to exist. We don't have society without Earth, unless we find another planet or something, but that's not in the foreseeable future. And then from society, within that society grows the economy, and within each one of those economies you have the individuals acting as a part of the system. And so I won't go into a lot of details on this, but basically what I've realized in the tradition that I've been mentored in is that there's these 4 elements. And I know that in traditional Chinese medicine and some other Asian cultures, there's the 5 elements, and I've been studying and learning more about that. I'm going to continue to incorporate that into my understanding, but bear with me, this is maybe a little bit different from what some of you have heard, but it's the 4 elements which is common in all of the Americas, in Europe, and pretty much all of the indigenous shamanistic cultures. They have this idea that there's the earth and the world is made up of 4 elements. And these 4 elements are earth, air, water, and fire. And this actually reflects a lot of modern science, where there's 4 states of matter. There's physical, which relates to earth. There's liquid, which relates to water. There's the gas, which relates to air. And there's the state of plasma, which is basically fire and electricity. And so these 4 elements exist in nature, in an ecological system. It's the basis of ecology, is the water cycle, the air cycle, the mineral cycle, and the energy flow that's coming through it from the sun that drives the whole entire system. And so these 4 elements express themselves. I'm just going to write express: earth, air, they express themselves in interesting ways throughout. But if you look at nature and the garden, they can teach you a lot about how these elements exist in our society and in our economics and also in our individual self. So, for instance, in nature, and this is really, I'm going to give you a little prelude that these elements are 4 of the 5 steps. And the 5th one is actually in the middle right here. It's that place of 0 point and integration that we get to when we understand the whole of the system that we're designing with, working with. And I'm going to talk about practical things that we can do in each one of these elements. And before I do that, I'm also going to point out that the philosophies of these indigenous cultures, these really earth-based connected cultures to nature, also talked about how when we're doing healing work, we have to heal the body, which relates to the earth, the physical components. We have to heal the emotions, or become masters of emotions, learn to make choices that lead to positive emotions. The fire is the connection to our spirit, and the air is the mental, intellectual body that can move around like air. And so these elements of nature, they express themselves in all of reality, in all of creation. And so as we begin to become alchemists and healers of our own inner landscape, we can then start to teach that to our community, and we can actually get work, get paid teaching that, and get paid doing healing work, or growing gardens and growing food, or harvesting water, whatever it is. And we start to share that with our community, and we do the work in the ecology. So it's a two-directional system where we as individuals are the ones creating the change from the inside out. We have to be the change, but when we're making decisions, we need to think about the earth, because the earth ultimately comes first in the evolutionary existence of us being here. If we don't take care of the earth first, then none of us will survive, as I've said. So this is a sustainability model that I go into a lot of detail with in some of my workshops and writing. But for today, what we're going to talk about is these 4 elements and how we can practically become stewards of these elements, of these natural expressions of life on Earth. And in the 5 elements system, which again I'm learning more about, and I think is actually very complementary to this, just a little bit different of a perspective. There is the same elements, but in a slightly different arrangement. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's earth, metal, water, wind, and fire? Wood. Wood is instead of air, right?
The 5 elements?
Yeah.
Wood,
fire,
and
earth,
metal,
and water. Yeah. So it's very similar, but there's some different ways of looking at it. And I've had numerous conversations with people about this and the 5 elements, and how there's a lot of similarities, and there's also some very specific differences. But I think they're complementary. We don't have to argue about which one's right. They both serve us in understanding the whole of nature and how to become good stewards. So when I'm working with a landscape or a property, and I'm designing a sustainability system, a sustainable garden, or a community, whatever scale I'm working at of design, the first thing that I want to look at is the sun. And so step number 1. So appreciate and harmonize with the sun. And I think it's important to appreciate the sun, because if we're not appreciating the sun, then we don't really care as much about utilizing the value and the benefit of this exploding nuclear reactor that's millions of miles away from us, but just a perfect distance to be able to warm and heat our planet and drive all of life's systems. And it's a perfect energy source for us to do whatever we want to with, and it's renewable. It's not going to burn out anytime soon in our lifetime. It will eventually die, but it's a renewable energy source. It actually is the fuel of all life on Earth. It's the fuel of all. It's what we drove our car with here. It's what moves the air in the planet. It's what causes evaporation. It is really the power behind all of life and creation. So when I'm designing a property, I'm always thinking about how much sun do we have? Where is the sun in relationship to a garden bed, for instance? How can we maximize the potential of the sun, really harvest as much as possible? And I'm not just talking about plants. I'm not just talking about solar panels, which is the first thing that people think about. I'm also talking about plants that can harvest the energy of the sun or create shade in areas where we don't want too much sun. I'm talking about designing buildings to utilize the energy of the sun passively without having any moving parts or any other energy use. So passive solar heating of buildings. And using rocks and water to store the sun energy in a way where it can create a temperature moderation either inside of a building or in a landscape around trees or plants that you want have a microclimate around. So whenever I'm working with a client or on a site, I'm always thinking, how can we maximize our appreciation and harmonious, our harmonizing, our harmonious relationship with the sun and the energy of the sun. And sometimes that actually might mean removing some trees, harvesting trees, honoring and appreciating those trees, and using them as food for the soil. It's not like we're cutting them down and being like, get out of here, tree. We don't need you. It's like, oh, thank you, amazing, beautiful being. We're going to use this space for some other growth potential that will help benefit us and the earth. And so we're harvesting you, we honor you, we love you, respect you, and we're going to use you for firewood or for building garden beds or, bordering a path. So whenever I recommend to a client that they remove trees, it's not because I don't like trees, it's because we're looking at the whole system and what's going to optimize the design. So starting with the sun, step one, to healing the earth. Because so much of what we're doing is we're always looking to propane and natural gas and petroleum and fossil fuels and nuclear fuels. And even though ultimately those are some form of sun energy, nuclear's from a supernova that deposited a bunch of uranium on the earth a long time ago. But ultimately, all the fossil fuels are from ancient sun energy that's been fossilized. The difference is that we want to focus on renewable solar energy and solar energy that doesn't pollute our atmosphere, as opposed to what fossil fuels do. So, step one. Step two is, I'm going to reference my note here so I get the right verbiage I used. Honor and protect the soil. So this is our physical body, the structure, the solid state of matter in our earth, where the soil is really, it's the nourishment, the sustenance for all of life. It is what gives all plants their rooting medium and their nutrition, their minerals to grow. It creates their structure, and it's what builds our bodies. It's what mineralizes our bodies. Actually, in geology, they talk about soil as having a parent material, because the geology, the rocks that form the soil, is the parent material of that soil. And so, in essence, soil is our parent material as well. And our ancestors actually go back into the soil in a natural way. Our ancestors return to the earth and then are feeding us in their afterlife through the minerals that they provide back to the earth. If you cremate someone, you spread their ashes, those calcium and phosphorus, potassium, whatever minerals exist in that go back into the earth cycle. And so honoring and protecting the soil is really essential. It's why organic agriculture is so important. It's why we don't want to have a agricultural system that is tilling crops all the time and then leaving soil exposed, where the topsoil that's high in organic matter just blows away. We don't want it to be eroding when the rain falls. We always want to keep the soil covered. So in permaculture and sustainable landscaping and design, mulch and keeping your soil covered is really important, whether you're covering it with shredded up wood chips, trees, green waste, compost, cardboard, or various other material. What we want to do is create a system, like in our landscapes and gardens, like what nature creates, where there's multiple layers of plants and they all stack together to hold and bind the soil in place so that the soil is not going anywhere, and it's only increasing more and more life as it continues to complexify. So the second step, honoring and protecting the soil, and that really ultimately also means all of the life that's in the soil. There's more life, more microorganisms in a teaspoon of soil than there is humans on the planet Earth. And so in a healthy soil, the amount of biology that exists in there is really essential. And so there's all sorts of ways that we can feed the soil food web intentionally, with attention, with what we put into the soil and how we manage our land. And so, for instance, again, using chemical inputs, using chemical fertilizers or herbicides, these kinds of things are killing life. The intention is to kill something. And so that's what they do to the life system. And what we want to do is create more diversity, which adds resiliency, and feed the soil and the whole life with what it's needing. Because if you're having a problem with pests or some sort of crop issue, it's not that you have a pest problem, you have a deficiency in something that eats that pest. So that's one of the things that's talked about in permaculture a lot, is your problem is your solution. You just have to start thinking in whole systems and how things are a whole cascade and web of life. So before I go into this third step, I'm going to illustrate this with a tree. So we have a tree here. It's growing in soil. And the sun is coming down, so I'll make a sun here next to our step 1. Sun's coming down and fueling the growth of that tree. It's driving the vacuum suction and absorption of water from the soil. It's creating the power to drive photosynthesis. It's doing the work, the energy that's needed. And at the same time, the soil is providing the minerals. I'm just going to do a hexagon there as like a crystalline structure. So the soil is providing the minerals for the tree, the structure of the tree. So if the sun energy is the smallest particle of life, as kind of this life particle here illustrates, it's like this life particle sun, right? That this was a vision of Ilchi-Li's, yeah?
Yes.
And so this life particle sun is the smallest particle of this tree of life. The soil is the biggest, the largest structure of life. And then this, what's happening here is there's actually a spiral of energy. So there's stuff coming, there's energy, water and nutrients coming up, and sugars and starches and gases coming down. And there's, just like in our chakra system, there's a toroidal energy field, a system that's created. So leaves grow and then they fall and they decompose and they go into the soil. And then, it's two directional. So the energy that's coming down is feeding the soil. The roots are secreting different sugars and starches and feeding the biology of the soil. All plants are constantly pumping food into the soil to help create the biology that it wants in its ecosystem. So it's a two-directional flow of this toroidal energy pattern. And this vortex is another fundamental energy pattern. There's a lot of patterns that are talked about in permaculture and when we really study nature in depth. But ultimately, the concentric rings are one that I wanted to touch on today, and also this toroidal energy pattern where, in fact, did you know that each one of you are a toroidal energy pattern? Yeah? It's probably something that body and brain yoga talks about. And so we have energy flowing through us, but we also have each one of these elements. So the fire energy that we have inside of our body, when we eat something, we have fire in our stomach, right? If we're healthy, we have water up, fire down principle, which the tree illustrates really well. It's bringing the solar energy down into the tree and pumping that solar energy down into the earth and providing energy and fuel for the earth. And then it's also pumping water up and cooling the atmosphere, cooling the air, providing oxygen. And so in the human body, we also want to have that water up, fire down. And each one of the elements flows through us just like it does through a tree. So when we drink water, go, and then it goes through us, spirals through us, just like a vortex. and then it comes out and goes back into the ecology. So if I'm a human standing over here and I'm eating an apple off of this tree, yummy apple, I'm taking in the minerals and the water and the solar energy and even some gases of that apple. I'm taking it into my body, it's passing through my vortex, and then it goes back into the vortex of the tree and of nature. And so when we start to begin thinking in these systems and how through time we are completely connected, we are completely one with all of life, and we can easily become stewards of life-giving systems as opposed to degenerating systems or life-polluting systems. So the tree of life is a great illustration of how these elements flow. Is this everyone enjoying this? Is this useful? Good? Good? Okay. So, step 3, again, just referencing my specific wordage. Heal and restore the waters. So has anybody ever heard of humans causing water pollution?
Yeah.
Does that happen? Why do we do that? Because we're not so bright. Stupid. We're lazy. Do you think that we're thinking when someone is changing their oil and they spill oil all over the ground, do you think they're thinking about these systems and how in a couple of days they're actually going to be eating an apple from that earth, from that tree that is a part of them, that what we do to the web of life we do to ourselves? Do you think they have that awareness or that unity consciousness?
No.
Probably not. They're just focused on their little egoic self of an individual and doing what they need to do, change this oil, I'll just dump this oil right here. And all sorts of examples of how humans are not thinking about this and as an easy way of getting rid of some chemical or toxin, or accidentally, an oil pipeline bursts and spills millions of gallons into a river. This is a problem, right? The water is the blood of life. The fire is the spirit of life, the energy. Soil is the body. Water is the blood. It is what circulates the nutrients throughout all of Earth's systems. And if you look at the development of human civilization, you can see that the pattern of human development follows the water. It's, all the major development, major cities are all next to oceans, bays, and big rivers and lakes, because we use the water to circulate the life force, the life-giving energies of our culture building, of our societies and civilizations. And so, in order to heal the waters, we have to really be conscious of the chemicals and the pollutants and the kinds of things that we're the waste that we're dumping out, and preserving water, conserving it wherever possible. One example that's often used is in standard development of cities and properties. Usually people think of water as a liability, and they want to basically pipe it, pave it, and pump it to get rid of it. It's like, get the water out of here when it's raining, because to them, they are afraid of it. It causes building damage, it causes erosion, or various different problems. And then when we do that, all the water coming off of our roof that has dust and bird poop, and all the water coming off of our driveway that has maybe drippings of oil, and maybe an occasional bird poop as well, and some chalk from kids playing, various different things that build up on hard paved surfaces. All that just washes out into the street, and then into the drains, then into the creek. And it causes a lot of pollution. But it's actually very easy for homeowners, for property owners, as well as whole entire cities. Maybe very easy is an overstatement, but it's relatively easy to redirect that water into biological purification systems, like bioswales, to direct the water off your roof into rainwater gardens and retention ponds and swales, and basically think of water as this amazing gift from the heavens. It's falling on our head, and we need it for all sorts of uses. and we can store it in a tank and use it for things like watering plants or flushing toilets or even drinking if we had to. We'd want to sanitize it. But the big problem is that we're paving over and scaling off, closing off the ability of the Earth's surface, the soil, to absorb that water into the skin of the landscape. So what we need to do is start to open the soil back up, break up pavement, make driveways and roads permeable to water, and create a system where water is of value, it's a resource, and we're always trying to slow it down, spread it out, and sink it in to the landscape and utilize it to its highest value, not see it as something to get rid of. So this is the big change that's happening all over the world. It's called low impact development. It's already happening in a lot of major cities. A lot of cities in California are now requiring by law 100% of all rainwater to be infiltrated on site in new development. So this is the kind of change that's happening when we start to understand and connect to these fundamental core absolute values of nature that provide all of the basic services that we need to survive, like clean drinking water, air to breathe, food to eat, clothing, shelter, all of these basic services that we often in our capitalist system ignore that nature provides us. So the healing, the water is also important inside of us. So inside of us, in the system, in the lineage that I was taught, in the tradition I was taught, water relates to the emotions, and our emotions are flowing like water through us, and if we're not able to really master them, then we can have some issues. But ultimately, it's good to honor and acknowledge our emotions, allow them to flow, but to learn how to be the masters of our brains, right? And to master our emotional reactions, and the things that create negative emotions do less of, the things that create positive emotions do more of. So we can heal the water within us and be the change we want to see by the kinds of things we eat, by the kinds of energy that we put into our body, and by whether or not we're grateful for water every time we interact with it. We drink some water from our water bottle, take a shower, we cook food, we wash our hands. Every time we interact with water, we can be grateful for it, and embedding that energy of healing gratitude into the waters of life. So the fourth step, and then we'll get to the last one, fourth is to purify and cleanse the air. So there's a variety of ways that we can do this, and it's the plants are one of the main ways that we can do this, but we need to do this with our interior landscapes as well as our outer environments, because toxic buildings is a huge problem. A lot of buildings today are causing sicknesses and disease for people. Everything from mold and toxic off-gassing of paints, and I'm sure this building doesn't. I can feel this building has really healthy interior, but in a lot of buildings, cheap materials are used, toxic materials are used, and so we need to move away from all of those things that are polluting our air, that are causing an imbalance in our environment and as well inside of us. And then in the natural world and the outer environmental systems, we really have to look at the carbon that we're emitting. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in our activity. We really have to look at how we're contributing to all greenhouse gas emissions. Like one of the easiest things to do to help all of these cycles really, but to help the air, is to get your food scraps out of the landfill. If you compost your food scraps in your backyard, then those food scraps won't go into a landfill and get buried and compacted and decompose anaerobically, where they produce methane gas, which is a greenhouse gas they say it's 23 to 75 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So these simple things like composting our food scraps, like getting a low emissions vehicle, using renewable energy, solar energy, really encouraging our culture and our community and our government systems to change towards renewables. It's really the people who are going to make the governments and the corporations change. And again, starting with ourselves, with the energy of, in the system I was taught, the mind being the thoughts, or the air element being the mind and the thoughts. And so what energy are we putting out into the air? What kind of atmosphere are we creating with the music we listen to, and the things that we say to people, the thoughts that we have? And so we can really be advocates for health and growth by choosing what we think and say. And the fifth step here is kind of to bring it all together. It's all about commitment to being a steward of life and taking action. So with this understanding that we are connected with all of the cycles and systems of life, we are one with nature, we're one with ecology, we don't exist without it, and that we are creating a lot of imbalances in the natural world. So some would say we are the problem, and some say, oh, we don't need to heal nature, nature will be fine. And that's true. Ultimately, if we really, continue down the path we're going, species will continue to go extinct, the oceans will continue to acidify, the atmosphere will continue to build up with carbon dioxide, and more than likely, Earth will adjust and do what it needs to do to heal itself. And if humans want to live on and have a future on this planet, we can also be the solution. We have been the problem, and we can be the solution. If we choose to awaken to our unity and connection with all of life, and to consciously become Earth citizens, like the Earth Citizens Organization promotes, to consciously be stewards of these life support systems and do everything that we can to benefit them. And that doesn't mean shaming ourselves when we drive our fossil fuel powered car, because that doesn't help anything. But really consciously looking at how can we be a positive influence, positive change, starting with ourselves and in our inner body, mind, heart, and spirit landscape, and then in our family, in our community, and then in our economics, that what's our profession and our purpose in life, and how do we make a living? Is it benefiting the planet and people, or is it just benefiting our pocketbook? We can really begin to look at these things, and I think humanity more and more is looking at these things. I think that more people are looking and talking about these things than we would all imagine. It's just it's not being televised, and it's not being broadcasted, and the systems and institutions that are in power are trying to maintain that power. So they're a dying dinosaur, and a whole new human civilization and society is emerging. So yeah, commitment and action, it all starts with each one of us. The change begins within and ripples out from there. So I think, let's see, is there anything else that I want to speak to? I think the last thing is that I feel like we are on this journey as a human civilization together for a reason, that everything that we're doing to the planet happens for a reason, and that it is really all part of some divine orchestrated unfolding that we don't necessarily have control over. What we can control is the choices that we make and the way that we live and what we want to stand for and the values that we want to share with the world. And ultimately, my takeaway is we can get very depressed looking at the problems of our world. I know I have in the past. It can be very overwhelming to think about all of the things that we're doing to the natural world and whether or not we will survive. And I've experimented with what it feels like to go down that path of it's worthless, we need to give up, there's no hope, just eat your macaroni and cheese all day long and drive your SUV, or not that macaroni and cheese is necessarily best, but just do whatever, it doesn't matter. And ultimately what that leads to for me personally, and I've seen it lead to for others, is more sadness, more shame, more depression, more guilt, more anger, more frustration. And so the wise choice for a human, I'll just say straight up, the wise way to live is to believe in a positive vision of the future, to put all of our intention and focus and willpower toward creating a new earth. Because either way, even if we end up all dying, at least we had a good life and we were working towards something beautiful, and maybe we actually will succeed and create that beautiful dream. Either way, we're making a choice to stand for something righteous and beautiful and be a part of the solutions as a part of the problem, as opposed to a part of the problem. So thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope that we all can learn together and work together to be a part of the solutions to the problems of our world today. Thank you.